What if I told you that Bellatrix Lestrange wasn't insane at all? That every scream, every cackle, every murder she committed was not madness, but method. The wizarding world wants you to believe she was just a deranged witch, a monster born of chaos. But what if the truth is darker? What if Bellatrix understood human psychology better than anyone else in the entire series? By the end of this video, you'll never see Bellatrix the same way again. For years we've been told Bellatrix Lestrange is simply insane, the mad cousin, the deranged follower of Voldemort, the woman whose love for darkness was so absolute that it defied reason. That's the illusion, that's the story the wizarding world wants you to accept, because it's easier to sleep at night, believing that evil is random, that it looks like Bellatrix, uncontrollable and hysterical. But evil rarely looks like chaos. True evil hides behind purpose, behind devotion, behind the smile of someone who believes their actions make perfect sense. Bellatrix was not mad. She was the purest example of controlled psychopathy. Everything she did, from torturing Neville's parents to mocking Hermione, was driven by one psychological engine: the need to dominate through love and fear simultaneously. The question isn't how crazy was she, it's how much of herself did she sacrifice to become the perfect manipulator? Why did she worship Voldemort? Not as a leader, but as a god. Why did she act unhinged in public, yet show surgical precision in her torture techniques? And why did Voldemort, the most intelligent sociopath in wizarding history, trust her more than anyone else? The psychological evidence tells a completely different story, one that reveals Bellatrix not as a victim of insanity, but as the deliberate embodiment of the darkest truth of human devotion, that love, when fused with obsession, can become the most refined form of evil imaginable. Evidence. The psychology of devotion. Bellatrix as the perfect narcissist's mirror. Bellatrix's loyalty to Voldemort wasn't love. It was narcissistic mirroring. In dark psychology, mirroring is how narcissists form bonds. Not through empathy, but through imitation. Bellatrix reflected Voldemort's grandeur back at him, amplifying his delusions of godhood. When she knelt before him whispering, "My lord," she wasn't surrendering, she was feeding him. She became the emotional extension of his ego. Every word she spoke affirmed his superiority, making her indispensable. That's why Voldemort kept her close. She wasn't a servant, she was his psychological echo chamber. True madness would have repulsed Voldemort. What he craved was control, and Bellatrix gave it willingly. Her laughter was theatre, her chaos carefully timed to serve his myth. In public, she performed mania to inspire fear. In private, she maintained precision. That's not insanity, that's mastery of perception. 2. The trauma bond. How pain became her religion. Dark psychologists describe trauma bonding as the emotional addiction victims develop toward their abusers, but Bellatrix reversed it. She weaponized it. During the torture of the Longbottoms, she didn't just inflict pain, she engineered identity collapse. She knew that breaking a mind requires rhythm, pain, pause, compassion, and pain again. Every act of torture reinforced her dominance, and she enjoyed it not for the suffering, but for the control. This pattern defines trauma bonding. The victim associates their tormentor with meaning. Bellatrix believed Voldemort gave her meaning through suffering, and she replicated that dynamic with others. The more agony she caused, the closer she felt to her master. This is where her psychology diverges from typical insanity. She understood the mechanics of suffering. Her laughter during torture wasn't madness, it was ritual, a reinforcement of her identity as the high priestess of pain. 3. The illusion of madness. Bellatrix is a strategic manipulator. Every time we see Bellatrix, her energy dominates the room. People interpret her mania as instability, but that's a misdirection. Psychologically, she practiced chaotic dominance, a tactic used by cult leaders and interrogators. By being unpredictable, she made others doubt their own control. Remember the Malfoy manor scene? She toys with Hermione, alternating between mockery and cold logic. "You filthy little mudblood," she hisses, but notice her precision. She doesn't scream continuously. She pauses, calculates, chooses her words like scalpels. This is gaslighting, a systematic attempt to distort Hermione's perception of safety and identity. And it works. Hermione's screams aren't just physical pain, they're the sound of psychological disintegration. Bellatrix understands that fear isn't strongest when loud. It's strongest when quiet. That's why she laughs right out, inflicting horror to create cognitive dissonance in the victim. The brain can't reconcile laughter with agony. That's psychological warfare. 4. The cult of personality. Bellatrix is the prophet of Voldemort. Bellatrix didn't just serve Voldemort, she preached him. Her fanaticism wasn't spontaneous. It was calculated evangelism. In psychology, this is called totalistic conversion. She reprogrammed herself to erase moral conflict. Every act of cruelty became sacred duty. Notice how she scolds Lucius Malfoy for failing the Dark Lord. "You lost your faith." She uses religious language. That's not delusion, it's propaganda. Bellatrix understood that the strongest way to control a group is through shared ideology bound by fear. In essence, she turned Voldemort's death cult into a psychological religion. Her beauty, her grace, her confidence, all were tools. She was the face of devotion, the saint of suffering, and by embodying that ideal, she became Voldemort's greatest weapon of recruitment. The irony, she didn't need magic to control others. She used psychology. Her wand was a symbol. Her real power was belief manipulation. 5. The beautiful face of madness. How Bellatrix weaponized femininity. Society expects women to embody empathy and gentleness. Bellatrix inverted that expectation. Her power came from combining beauty with brutality, a duality that creates what psychologists call cognitive discordance. Viewers, and even characters within the story, struggle to process her cruelty precisely because she doesn't fit the stereotype. Her elegance disarms you before her violence strikes. This isn't random, it's psychological entrapment. In her interactions with Voldemort, she behaves submissively, yet subtly controls the emotional temperature. Her eyes plead for his approval, but every gesture reinforces his dependency on her validation. She turned her femininity into psychological leverage, becoming both victim and manipulator simultaneously. This paradox, beauty intertwined with horror, is what makes Bellatrix terrifying. She forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth, that cruelty can hide behind grace, that love can justify violence, and that devotion can rot into psychosis without ever looking insane. But it gets darker because Bellatrix Lestrange didn't fall into madness, she chose it. Her descent wasn't loss of control, it was transcendence of empathy. She realized that to achieve absolute belonging under Voldemort, she had to destroy the last human barrier inside her, guilt. Once that was gone, all that remained was devotion, and devotion without guilt is indistinguishable from evil. That's why she never flinched, never hesitated. She had no internal conflict. Bellatrix Lestrange achieved what Voldemort never could, complete psychological surrender to darkness. The horrifying truth is that Bellatrix Lestrange wasn't Voldemort's most faithful servant. She was his mirror. Voldemort sought immortality through domination. Bellatrix sought immortality through devotion. Both were terrified of insignificance. She didn't love him, she wanted to become him. Every act of cruelty was a step toward merging with the ideal of power she worshipped. Psychologically, this is called identification with the aggressor, a coping mechanism born from deep fear and admiration. Bellatrix's mind solved her trauma by becoming the very darkness she once feared. That's why she smiled as she killed. That's why she laughed while dying, because she had achieved the one thing all narcissists crave, a perfect, unbreakable identity. She wasn't acting out of chaos. She was living her truth. And that's the final twist. Bellatrix wasn't the madwoman of the story. She was the only character who truly understood what the wizarding world runs on. Fear disguised as love, power disguised as devotion. She exposed the truth that terrifies everyone, that madness isn't screaming in the dark, it's smiling while the world burns. So now ask yourself, how does this change your view of Bellatrix Lestrange? Was she a monster or a masterpiece of dark psychology? Every time you rewatch the films, remember, her laughter wasn't insanity. It was strategy. Her devotion wasn't love. It was control. And her beauty wasn't a mask. It was the weapon that made her unstoppable. The next time you see her bow before Voldemort, you're not watching servitude. You're watching the purest expression of manipulation, the predator pretending to worship the hunter until she becomes one herself. Bellatrix Lestrange wasn't born evil. She learned that love is the most dangerous drug, and she overdosed on it willingly. Share this with other Harry Potter fans. They need to see the truth hiding beneath the madness. Because once you understand Bellatrix, you begin to see the entire wizarding world differently. And this is just the beginning of the psychological darkness buried inside Harry Potter. Next time, we'll explore the mind of another hero, one whose manipulations were even more perfect than Bellatrix's. You think you know Albus Dumbledore. You don't.